The practice of fasting has been used for both spiritual development and physical healing for many centuries. In the Bahá'í Faith, as in many religions, a period of fasting once a year is seen as a symbol of purification and a means of moving closer towards our Creator, putting us in touch with our duty and destiny here on earth. In her book, The Supreme Remedy, Reflections on Applying Natural Healing Arts to the Baha'i Fast, Deborah Walters, a Doctor of Naturopathy, draws on both the Baha'i teachings and her professional experience to examine the human condition of soul, mind and body, how they're interrelated, and how they can be integrated, transformed and energized through the spiritual discipline of the Baha'i Fast. I'm Rob Weinberg, and in this episode I'm joined by Deborah Walters to discuss how we can purify and energize soul, mind and body during the fast and live a healthy lifestyle all year round. Welcome to Great Reads, the George Ronald podcast. So Deborah, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, what inspired you to write the first comprehensive guide to the Baha'i Fast?
Thank you for having me today and discussing the book with me. The fast is nearly approaching and it's an important thing to think about. I became a new Baha'i and I wasn't going to write a book on the fast, but I searched for books on the fast. And there were only compilations. And when I would go to Baha'i meetings, people would sit around and I would say, what about the fast? Because I was still nursing and pregnant at the time. And I didn't even know there was a fast when I became a Baha'i. So that was a panic. And people would just say, oh, there's a lot of writings. Just read the writings during the fast. You eat in the morning and you break the fast at night and then you pray a lot. And then they would smile. And I'd be like, is there some mystery here or secret? I couldn't figure it out. So I went to a big city. I thought somebody there will know how to fast because it was my first fast coming up and they had a meeting. So I drove 2 hours to a huge city and it was the same thing. They would read some writings. Everybody would smile. And it was a very pleasant atmosphere. And I'd be like, but how do you do it? So I found a guy who was very talkative and I cornered him and asked him a lot of questions. And he gave very ill advice. Eat as much as you can in the morning, stuff your face at night, bear through it during the day, read a lot. I was like, I got to figure something out. So in the Shrine of Baha'u'llah, I went on pilgrimage and prayed at his threshold. And I said, please let somebody write a book on the fast. And then I was quiet and I had this little prompting. I said, I'm willing to do it if no one else will do it. So after 3 years, I went, darn it, it's going to be me. So that's what prompted me to do it.
How did your own personal spiritual journey shape the framework of the book, The Supreme Remedy?
I gave him a Baha'i later in life, but my spiritual journey was always very mystical in nature, but very practical. I love the mystical nature of the Baha'i faith, but what I loved about it was so practical. It had real world solutions, not only personally, but collectively. That was such an attraction for me. And I thought, why isn't this with the fast as well? So I brought that approach in towards the fast.
So you work professionally as a naturopath. Why did you feel compelled to blend your profession, if you like, with the Baha'i teachings in this book?
I was getting my doctorate at the time in naturopathy, and I was drawn to that type of healing because it was a westernized model of healing that was accessible. You could get a degree in it. And it was the most natural thing I could find. I didn't want to go into Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic or other traditions that I wasn't as familiar with. And it made sense to me about eating, movement of the body, really lifestyle factors. I wanted to really get the basics of good living to prevent disease in the first place.
You called the book The Supreme Remedy. What does Baha'u'llah's description of fasting as the supreme remedy actually mean in practical terms?
As the 400 plus pages in the book imply, it means a lot. And I, even after years after writing the book and thinking about it, every fast, I think, I don't know anything about the fast. It's so vast and innumerable and limitless in its potentialities. So the only way I could summarize that perhaps is saying that Baha'u'llah called it the supreme remedy for self and passion for a real reason, because it has not only physical implications, and the spirit interacts with the physical body, our biology. It prompts us, it speaks to us through our biology. That's how we get messages, guidances through a series of sensations, pressures. And when the body's biochemistry is off, it's more difficult to understand the subtleties of the different signals we have in our system, because humans are very noisy. So the supreme remedy for self and passion is really taking the mind and the soul and the physiological body and creating a coherence, or as Baha'u'llah calls it, an inner unity, is when you really take away that layer of self and passion, you're really left with this beautiful animal kingdom that we all are living in, our Homo sapien species, in this oneness model where we're all interconnected with all creatures, and we can hear that level of noise. And so that's the beauty of the fast.
So during the course of your research, I assume you looked at fasting practices in other faith traditions. Do you think the Baha'i fast is different or in some way more cohesive than what you've discovered in other methods of fasting?
Just like when I try to help people with migraines have common symptoms, and then there's peculiar symptoms, right? Much like we understand the laws of the faith, there's common laws like the golden rule, and then we have particular for this day and age laws. It's similar to this, is that fasting has been much the same throughout history, except for Christianity. There was no fasting in that dispensation called for. So that was a differentiation, but every religion has had its fasting practices and sacrifice, because this is really submission to the will of God. And so the Baha'i Faith is the most similar to Ramadan. It's just set into a certain time period.
So from your point of view as a healthcare practitioner, what are some of the physiological detoxification processes perhaps that occur during fasting, and how do you think they support spiritual clarity?
Yeah, a lot happens during fasting biochemically in the body. Just the main points are really burning of fat cells, because once we fast, you refrain from food, and differentiating from the popular intermittent fasting nowadays, most fasts have type of drinks or water to maintain hydration, whereas the Baha'i fast is called a dry fast. So it has no food, no water. That burns up fat cells much faster at a faster rate. It affects human growth hormone a little bit differently from the science I've read. It induces autophagy. Higher autophagy is where cells with toxicity, it cleans out our dead cells, so to speak, cells that aren't working. It increases a lot of these metabolic states within the body. The lymph is affected. I could really go into detail about it, but it affects the microbiome, which, of course, back when I wrote the book, the gut health was not really widely accepted, understood, and I was all about gut health. And the only difference in the book, if I wrote it now, is I'd put more gut health information, microbiome stuff in there. Allergies was a gut issue, was really dynamic at that time. Like, what? And now people are like, oh, it's a histamine. Yeah, that's a gut issue, because the gut interacts with the immunity. So immunity is involved. There's so many things at play here. But really, if you think about it, when you refrain from food and water, you're going into the body and going into fat reserves, first in the liver and the muscle, and then first the surface glycogen. And then you go into autophagy and other things and go into the fat cells. And that's week 2 to 3 in the fast. You're usually going into that. And then week 3 plus on, metabolic rates are pretty stabilized for most healthy people at that point. And we never go into like bones or muscles and seep energy from those. But again, this is why people who don't have proper nutrition shouldn't fast, because it may go into that if you've been really undernourished. That's a short summary of some biochemical processes that happen while you fast.
So clearly there's a physiological aspect to it, but how do you reconcile some of those, if you like, scientific aspects to fasting with the spiritual symbolism which fasting clearly represents in the Baha'i Faith?
All right, why don't you think of a time you ate a meal that was high in fats, salt, and sugar? How did you feel an hour afterwards? And then did you try to pray while you felt that way and try to feel spiritual? When we have a lot of built up toxicity in the body or built up residue, things that our process aren't running as smoothly, it's more difficult to feel that lightness of the spirit on top of the heaviness. Also, the emerging studies on the gut-brain axis and how the gut regulates mood, even affects your mood, are just outstanding. It really does affect one's inner experience. Shoghi Effendi says life is ultimately the battle within. Your inner experience is life. So how I'm experiencing life, how I'm living biologically in the world, through how I move, how I eat, how I am socially connected, how I am emotionally regulated, how I'm wired genetically, that all does affect you. Well, the spirit does transcend this biological world of matter, no doubt. Like when we have disease, the soul's not affected. Baha'u'llah is pretty clear about that from my understanding. But we can use this animal kingdom experience through our life and our choices for spiritual evolution. So it makes those choices harder to get to, much slower, if we are dragging on a biological level.
Yes, so certainly most people, when they fast, do find that it can bring up a lot of stuff for them, what we might call emotional messiness, or it may also help them address some addictive patterns. Why does that happen in fasting, that you have these kind of emotional swings that can be quite debilitating, I think?
Yeah, they really can be. And because I see people all over the world, sometimes I do see a collective pattern, which is really interesting for me. I'm like, wow, this fast is really bringing out XYZ in a lot of people. And it's reassuring to a lot of clients who are fasting, hear those things. They say, oh, this is happening on a collective level. So sometimes it's collective, sometimes it's individual, but it can be very messy. And some fasts seem easier than others. So when it is messy, what I would say is that the body stores a lot of memory in the cells. I saw a paper just released where fat cells retain memory of when you were obese forever. And so even smoking studies, I remember writing the book and reading smoking studies that even if you quit, you can pick it up like that. Any addiction, the body, it remembers. So when you fast, you're having all those toxic parts of us burning. The autophagy is happening, the cleanup, the garbage and the sewer and the lymph, right? And you're having all this happening. And the gut microbes also, you're starving a lot of bad bacteria or yeast cells, microbes like candida. And candida, people with an overgrowth of candida can be highly irritable, angry, anxious. I've seen that in a lot of my cases. So not only are your gut microbes screaming for their sugar or for whatever they need to eat while they're dying, die-off is happening, you also have toxins running through your system. So this is changing your mood, number one, during fasting. And then number two, on just because in the book, I separate out mind, body, and spirit, right? So that's on a body level. And then on a mind level, you have your ego throwing out tantrums. I have to get up early. I have to eat really early. I don't like being up this early. I don't like not eating all day. My mouth is so dry. My mouth is so dry. My mind, right? Whatever, your ego is throwing up these tantrums all day. And if you haven't been mindful to self-discipline and allowed your ego like a dog, have you been in a house where a dog kind of has been allowed to do whatever he wants? And how uneasy that feels if you haven't been around a dog like that. It's like you realize you're living inside of yourself with the dog that's been allowed to do whatever it wants in the house, and now you're trying to discipline it. I don't think so. So, sometimes the fast can be a crash course in those lessons for us, depending on how we've lived prior to the fast period and how disciplined we become. Their ego's always going to throw up a fight when we are trying to discipline it. And discipline meaning loving guidance, right? When you discipline a horse or a dog, it's always through respect, love. You leave the animal's free will intact. You train the animal to want to agree to what you're asking for. You're providing stability for it and love. And yeah, it's firm but kindness. So it's how we respond also to that can either exacerbate or intensify that response.
I think part of the challenge might be is that it just starts, doesn't it? So do you consider how people might even prepare in the days and weeks running up to the fast so that it doesn't cause such an immediate shock to the system? Or do you think
Yeah.
that's actually a good thing?
I would tell you, for some people, shock is good and it works and it's better. And some people need to prepare. I have people come to me, some with spreadsheets of their symptoms and data tracked and graphs. And I'm like, wow, this is really intense. And some people come and haven't prepared at all for the appointment, and both somehow work. So there's not, again, writing the book on the fast was really challenging because there's not one right way to do it. But what I took the approach of was there's a gentle way to do it. And I believe that as humans in our evolution, we're not kind enough to ourselves. The kind or gentler way is this path. And some people need that big wild ride in order to get the growth they need, right? That confronting themselves. So I do take a chapter in the book for each mind, body, soul, for how to prepare in each of those, right? And so you want to set yourself up for success. The fast isn't easy, and it's simple and straightforward on how it's done, but there's a lot of challenges there. So there are things for the body you can do to prepare. I tell people, depending on how toxic you've been living and not careful with your diet, you can eat a recipe called Kachari. It's an ancient Ayurvedic recipe. It helps clean out your digestive tract a bit, and it's soothing to the digestive system, very healing and nourishing, especially on the amino acid protein level for the mung bean. And you can do that to really gently prepare your body for the fast and hydrate a lot. Go grocery shopping, prepare your pantries, take away all your salty, sugary snacks if you can, because if they're in the house, you're going to have a fight on your hands with your gut microbes and your ego, right? And for the mind, you want to think about, what am I addicted to besides my phone? Because everyone's addicted to that. And how many screens can we have in front of us now? Like, I got the computer, I got my phone, I got my iPad, and I have the TV on. And I can't tell you how many houses have that. I'm like, oh my gosh, no wonder there's cognition and attention and focus problems. So really, what do I want to focus on for the fast? What am I wanted taking a break from is really important. Again, the fast is all about space, taking breaks, and refraining. It's about refrain and not feeding the system, whether it's the societal system at large that's not working or our own personal systems. And then also for the soul, it's not about refraining. It's about feeling God's sustenance and leaning on into that and feeling God's sustenance and taking that up as nourishment during. And again, when you're not feeling well during the fast and having those wonky days and the moods, it's harder to really tune into that level. But really preparing for that, a book, or what would you like to really think about? I pick a virtue every fast and really deep dive in that, pick a good book. So there are some ways you can definitely prepare.
It seems to me from what you're saying that there are a lot of benefits, obviously, to fasting for the body and the mind and the soul. And yet we only do it for 19 days of the year. How do you cultivate the kind of resilience that's required that extends just beyond the month of fasting? Or do you think it's actually a good idea to go back to fasting from time to time through the year, although it may not have the spiritual power, if you like, of the specific month?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. If you're not a Baha'i, I recommend that people fast in the spring and fall when the seasons change, because that's when the immunity is the most vulnerable. So again, giving that gut health, the gut microbes, a chance to reconstitute themselves, a time to maybe add some probiotics and do some fasting to just get the gut health in line for the immunity for the changing of seasons is really good. There's no soulful part of that. It's just how to handle the body within the changing seasons. Also, I recommend intermittent fasting for people because, again, as cleanly as you want to live, we still have a lot in our foods, no matter how clean you buy your food. If you buy organic and as clean as you want it, it's still going to have things. Intermittent fasting, we make dietary errors all the time, combining different foods we shouldn't. And just the deliciousness of our society have so many good things to eat. And we eat out in restaurants that may not be prepared well. Intermittent fasting is really good. After we travel, intermittent fasting is basically, you can just think of it easily as just skip a breakfast, skip a dinner one night, 12 hours at least until you eat again.
Do you feel that having done the book, The Supreme Remedy, that your own fasting practice has deepened and become more profound?
Yes and no. Like I said, every time the fast comes, I think, I don't know anything about the fast. I have the same little voice in the back of my head. Why am I doing this? And then sometimes this is great. It's exhilarating. So again, every fast is different. And again, depending on what's happening in your own personal life during the fast. Sometimes I've been under really duress in a March I was in grad school again recently. So exams, right? And to manage getting out, it's a lot to manage. Taking really high level, graduate level biology exams under the fast is no joke. Organic chemistry exams, I'll never forget that one. That outside world, the environment in which you're living in is reflective on you. How stressful is your environment? Yeah, some fasts are more profound than others, but I know what I'm looking for after writing the book. Let's put it that way.
Have you had much feedback since the book came out? Because it's now 10 or 11 years since the book was published. Have you received reader feedback which has surprised or inspired you?
Before COVID, I would be invited to talk at conferences. So I was always surprised people knew I wrote a book. They would come to my talks and we have study circles on your book for the fast. And I was like, oh, a little bit. I felt a little too seen, almost naked. Oh gosh, you're reading my book to that level. Oh gosh, what mistakes are in there? You do all that tough stuff as an author. And it was, first of all, it was unnerving because I forget I publish a book until the fast comes around every year. And secondly, I can't tell you how many times people have said, and I've been moved to tears hearing it, saying, I never fasted as a Baha'i. And now I understand the fast, why we do it so much better now. Number one. Number two, I felt brave enough to try it. I'm going to cry. Just that, I don't know why that hits me every time. Just try it. Even for a few hours, go try it. And just hearing that, I don't know, it just makes me feel so warmed and happy and it's like watching your kid ride a bicycle, right? I'm doing it, Mom. It's just, you feel so exhilarated for them that they're partaking of something and because I think it resonates with me, when I first became a Baha'i, I didn't know how to do it. I was scared because I didn't know, I was ignorant. And once I understood on a biochemical level how to eat, how to break the fast properly so I wouldn't get so sick, and that fasting is tough enough, but there was a way to do it that it was made a little more fluid and gentle, and the spirit could be palpable. It wasn't just a miserable get through it bit and read the prayers and do all the hard things. So not only are they doing it, but they're happy. Like they're happy and you can see they're filled with light, and you can, like a fragrance, almost smell the fragrance of the benefits they're getting from fasting. So, I've heard that so many times, and I can't tell you how many Baha'is aren't fasting because of that.
I think your book is probably a great help. And thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you again for having me. It's delightful to connect today about it.
The Supreme Remedy, Reflections on Applying Natural Healing Arts to the Baha'i Fast by Deborah Walters is available now from grbooks.com and from your National Baha'i Publishing Trust or distribution service. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Great Reads, the George Ronald podcast.